Welcome to Arts Roll Call, a podcast showcasing artists and arts organizations talking about the role of the arts today in Greater Lansing. I'm Robin Miner-Swartz. I'm an editor, communications consultant, and an arts advocate. And today I am talking with my friend Chad Swan-Badgero, who is the Arts Education Program Manager for the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs. Chad is also the founder and artistic director of Peppermint Creek Theatre Company and co-artistic director of the Renegade Theater Festival. He is slightly obsessed with DIY home renovation projects, cooking, and his endlessly adorable 15-month-old son, Sawyer. Chad, it is so good to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for asking me. I'm excited about the dedicated time to talk to you, Robin.
I know. I was like, this is work time. This is great.
I know. I love these overlaps.
Yes, it's a lovely thing. I love that. Always happens in Lansing, and that's one of the things I love about it. Mm-hmm. Well, let's start with you telling us a little bit about your history with the Arts Council and how you and Peppermint Creek are connected now.
Yes. So I did a term of service with AmeriCorps for 2 years when I was transitioning from my work as an educator. I had taught K through 12 as well as at the college level at LCC. And I was feeling like I wanted to get more involved in community service and community revitalization. And so I pivoted and worked with AmeriCorps for 2 years in the Old Town region at the Old Town Commercial Association. And when that time was coming to an end, I was sort of saying goodbye to the folks in Old Town, and the Arts Council of Lansing was one of them. And I had obviously been aware of the Arts Council. They had sort of assisted me over the years with little and large things with Peppermint Creek. And I stopped in to say goodbye, and the executive director at the time asked what I was planning on doing next. And I said, I don't have any idea, other than I know that I don't really want to go back into the classroom. I really have loved being more directly engaged and involved in the community. And so I'm hoping to get more involved in that way. And I said, and I think it sort of slipped out. I was like, I'd like to do sort of what you guys are doing. And she didn't say this out loud, but I like to believe that in her head, she went, that's what I wanted to hear. And then the next day they called and they said, we created a new position for a communications director or person. And I asked if I wanted to apply for it. And I didn't even think. I typically am like pretty methodical as far as my thought process and major life decisions. And I just was like, yep, I would love it. I didn't even care how much it was paying. So I was at the Arts Council for about 2 years in that communications role, which was really valuable as far as and then after 2 years, then I transitioned to the position that I'm at now at the State Arts Council. And it was a really wonderful, logical sort of stepwise progression to go from a sort of tri-county view of our state and the arts that we offered locally, which is something that I kind of was aware of already with my involvement with Peppermint Creek, but it really sort of deepened that understanding and broadened sort of my view of artists in our region. And then to go to a statewide perspective of the arts was really a really valuable step. So that was sort of how I was deeply embedded in the work that the Arts Council does. And then obviously as an Arts Council member for Peppermint Creek, as well as the Renegade Festival, we have a nice relationship. So
well, and it sounds like it really grew nicely into your next role for work. So how did what you did with the Arts Council inform and enhance and help with what you're doing now at the state level?
Yeah, I believe it's the only reason I got the job I had today, which is my dream job. I want to do this job till I retire. And so but I don't think I would have gotten the job that I have now if I hadn't worked at the local Arts Council level, because, when I went in for the position at the state, I never had a dream of working for the state. I've always worked in education or the arts, but I never really sort of imagined I would work at the state, for the state of Michigan. It seems sort of very robotic from what I typically work at. And so, but I was this weird, and I just didn't even believe I would get it. But then looking back, I think I was just this weird sort of amalgamation of all of the pieces at this position that I particularly do calls for, which was, education work and community development work and the art and arts work. But then specifically having worked at a local arts council absolutely informed sort of my view of working for the state arts council. So I think it was integral. It's probably one of the only reasons I got the job.
Well, and you've worked on both sides of that fence, both as somebody who has needed services and support from those organizations, and now somebody who is able to provide that to organizations.
Yeah, and I think that it's, it's certainly been, my whole life, I think, has been a balance of how do I do the work that I'm doing during the day, whether that is as an educator when I was in the schools or at the college, and then now from both arts council jobs. How do I balance that work and then the work that I do with a nonprofit arts organization with the theater? Because even though Peppermint Creek is not my job, and then I don't get paid for it, but it's sometimes, as anyone that works in a nonprofit knows, it sometimes feels like a full-time job. Mm-hmm. And so always balancing those two priorities has been probably like my life's work. And by that, I mean like my life's challenge. Because how do you, and anyone that wears multiple hats, I think knows like how can you give 100% of your energy and your focus and your passion to one thing and to another thing when they overlap, especially, or if they're different. So I think that I'm constantly sort of learning that balance, and they certainly inform each other, I think, in really great ways, because I understand so many of our grantees for MCACA are small nonprofit arts organizations, just like Peppermint Creek, and so I completely understand the sort of framework and that they're working with, and then also needing to sort of not be specifically focused on one arts organization and know that we're serving the entire state is what you have to keep doing with like your head.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, so your work and life are revolving around theater and arts and culture, but also advocacy, as you said, is woven into all of those things. Mm-hmm. Why is advocacy important to organizations like yours and like the Arts Council?
Because the world does not appreciate the arts in the way they should. That's why. And, I was going to say I'm a terrible advocate. I'm not a terrible advocate. It's not in my nature to ask for help. Mm-hmm. And I think in its core, advocacy is about asking for help or asking for support for the work that you do. But my entire life, the life of the arts, I don't know how broad we want to go, but it's always, I don't think that the arts are valued or seen as integral to sort of our everyday lives as they really are. So an interesting sort of reflection for me has always been working at MCACA. We're housed under the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and they produce the Michigan Travel Guide, the Pure Michigan Travel Guide, right? And it's always so striking to me that despite the fact that we don't really talk to the economic development folks a lot in regards to what we do, I don't know why, we just don't. We're in the same building, but every time that magazine comes out, every season, like at least 70 to 75% of the organizations and the events that they highlight about how to like live a great life in Michigan all revolve around arts and culture. So when we're talking about economic development, when we talk about living a full and dynamic life, it always kind of comes down to our experiences with arts and culture. And yet we always treat it, when we're talking from a legislative perspective or a funding perspective, we always treat it as if it's frosting or it's like extra that can be cut out. And I mean, that's like an age old tune, right? But I'm always, that's like the work, right, of advocacy, is sort of figuring out what is the way in which to make everyone, but particularly legislators who decide funding, understand the sort of integral part of the arts in our lives. So it's a huge thing.
Well, I think you really nailed it, that people just almost assume that it always happens and is taken care of and it's always there. And tickets must fund all of these things, so therefore we don't need to promote it. It just keeps going. But no, that advocacy is so key. And I think when we all think about what we promote about our region and what we love about our region, obviously those of us who are arts advocates and love the arts are predisposed to talking about that to begin with, but ask anyone from wherever they're from, and granted, they will talk about some of the very common local attractions that they love, but there's always arts woven into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think something that I'm really proud of about the work that, or well, proud, but I would also say that has been most interesting in our work in the last 2 or 3 years at MCACA has been we're working with a public will building campaign that talks about that. It's with an organization that also worked to eradicate smoking in restaurants, and so well, and not even that it wasn't about just eradicating smoking, but sort of like helping the general larger public understand the health crisis that is smoking. Well, so and so with working with them, it's been all about how do we actually more effectively talk about what people value in their lives. So really talking and narrowing down people's values. And when you can speak in that language, people it shifts people's mindset in a different way than just sort of like always like advocate, like the theater is so amazing, go to the theater. And and when you start to talk about what we can learn from the theater, what we can learn from music and dance and visual arts, and how that can tap into our core values. It's been interesting to learn that sort of psychology, I guess, behind how to talk to people in a more effective way.
Well, and I think that's even shifted now into the way we are all interacting with each other and the world in these past few months in light of the pandemic. And so over the past several months, we've seen that things have changed significantly for arts and culture, where theaters have been forced to close. We've had to shift how we interact with any kind of arts and entertainment in a virtual space. What has this been like for you and the rest of the theater community you interact with around Michigan and locally in Lansing?
Well, I think that I am a very precise, specific person to talk to about this because I am generally an eternal optimist. And so that's not to say that like I didn't have a valley that was this summer when it just felt like every time we tried to plan something, it would then get scrapped. And oh my God, this is like going longer than we expected and it's scrapped. And so I certainly went through like a gloom and doom day and a half, but I think that, so I think to your immediate question, I think that a lot of the theater community, locally at least, and this seems to be the case both across the state and beyond, is there's just a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of fear particularly about how do we support artists that live and work in the theater. So that's not as much of the case in local Lansing, but certainly as an industry, how do people that make their living, and that's like the on stage and off and behind the scenes. I heard an interesting fact that like the people that are employed in the arts, particularly in the theater, and that went to the theater just in New York City, like was 4 times the amount that go to like the Mets and all these other sports things. It's really insane. But so I think that there's a lot of fear and nervousness, which I think is mirrored by the nation. I think that there's also, I think, there's a lot of ultimate hope about the fact the sort of long-term resilience of theater as an art form, and that theater has powered through pandemics and plagues and huge chunks of time when they've gone dormant for a long time, and they always come back. I mean, if theater is really about telling stories about our shared experiences in our lives, then we will always have that impulse, and we will always have that that need and that desire. And so, however long this particular pandemic goes, whether it's done in the spring or it's for another 4 years, God forbid. I know, right? I shouldn't even put that energy out there. That theater will still be necessary when we come out of it. But I think I think those two things exist, sort of the fear and the ultimate hope. I think locally as a Lansing community, we're all feeling like, well, I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone. I feel like what I'm observing is that our season would have been underway by now. All of our Lansing theaters would have been underway, and we would have been going, we would have had our seasons planned, and we would have been building teams and putting out, brochures, et cetera, and all that would have been rolling. And that we've been severely paused. And I think that we're all trying to figure out so from a Peppermint Creek perspective, what do audiences actually want to see? What can they sustain? Do they want to sit in front of a computer anymore at all in their free time? That's not work. And then like going back, like how can we actually still in this weird time still address our mission? I mean, we are really fortunate that over the years, and this is our 18th season as a nonprofit, like we have always been really anchored by our mission. And so that has, and in this time, that's sort of what has, for me as an artistic director, has certainly kept me going and focused is, well, while it's going to lack that traditional sense of like proscenium stage, audience sitting all together right here, but yet our mission can still be like served in a lot of different means and capacities. So for me, ultimately as an artistic director for my own theater, I'm like hugely excited and thrilled that our mission still even more so almost feels even more necessary in this time.
So I want to take a point of privilege because I remember seeing one of your very first shows with Peppermint Creek, and you were still in high school, right? When you formed this theater troupe. And it was you and Spencer, and you were doing something, a 2-man show with a lot of characters. You had borrowed the Boar's Head stage, as I recall.
Yeah.
When you think back on that time, could you picture you'd be sitting 18 years later talking about the mission statement for the organization and the role of the arts in the community? And like, what did you imagine when you were a teenager starting a theater group?
Yes, I would have wanted to believe that this would still be happening. I have I was always coming out of a place of like, just like utter geeky passion for the theater. And so that remains true. I think that I would have been thrilled that we would have lasted this long, and that we would have sustained an audience this long. So to that part of it, I'm thrilled, and I would have believed that was the case. I believed in the work that we were doing, and then on the other side of it, what was true then is still true, like in its kernel, like right now, which is there is like so much more that I want to still accomplish, which I think artistically is like is an enviable place to be, because I'm certainly not bored, right? Yeah. So I'm not like, we did this already, and so I think that maybe like if I probably would have believed that I would have had more infrastructure in place right now. Like I would have believed that we had like a location that was ours, and we would have had a more robust sort of like volunteer support system. But I think that our existence and that I really still believe that like our mission has like really like has been woven so deeply into all the work that we do. And I think that each new season we get better at honing in on that mission. So yeah, I would be like, huzzah. I would have been like thrilled to know that. And I believe in our mission. I think I'm getting, to your comment about like, actually when you said point of privilege, like I've been like I've been trying to get better at understanding what our position of privilege is in our community, and like how we can use that place as a voice to sort of lift up other voices that maybe aren't as privileged as ours, or new voices. So that's something that I feel like we're still constantly working at.
Well, you've talked a lot about the mission of Peppermint Creek, but I don't think I've asked you exactly what it is. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yes, I can. It is to address current issues and create dialogue through the work that we're producing. And so that at the beginning really was about, I just really wanted to be doing new plays. I didn't want to be doing like, even though like there's so much value in Annie and Oklahoma, I think that, I really wanted to be doing new work that just hadn't been done locally. And that sort of was where the kernel of that sort of current issues came from. But as we've grown, as we've developed, the idea of exploring what does it mean to like consider what a current issue is, whether that be like locally or nationally and or both, and what does it mean to create dialogue? So like, for example, at the beginning of Peppermint Creek, I believed that creating dialogue was like sort of solely focused on having a talk back after the show. And that was sort of how to like immediately engage people in a discussion of what they just saw on stage. And, you know, and that has certainly evolved and developed over time. You know, in the last few seasons, I've read a lot about nationally how talkbacks aren't as effective, or how people don't really want to be engaged in how audiences don't want to be engaged in a talkback. And so really kind of evaluating in new ways, or trying to consider what does creating dialogue actually mean. So, yeah.
That's great. Well, in your history of all of the jobs you've had in theater, both behind the scenes and on stage, I'm sure you've had to think on your feet a whole lot. Do you have a story that you like to go to about something that went wrong in a live show, and a way that you navigated through that, or you helped other people navigate through it to have the, you know, the show must go on kind of quality to it?
Yes. And there's two that come to mind. I'm not going to tell the sad one, but I'll tell you the funny one. So we were, it was our first musical in the space that we were in at the Miller Performing Arts Center on the south side of Lansing. And it was our first musical that we had produced in that space. And every show that season, we had sort of like, no, it wasn't our first musical. I forget why it was. Anyway, so, and so we were, it was opening night, and it was cold outside. And so it was like, obviously must have been in the winter. And so we had, because we needed so much space for the show, it was the musical In the Heights. And we needed so much space in the actual theater that we decided, and to try to contain the musicians, we moved the musicians to what was typically right behind the stage in a different room, which was our dressing room. So there's like 12 musicians packed into this tiny room, and we always were having issues with power in that building. Like, we could never figure out, like, why are we blowing lights? Like, this used to be a community center. Why is there no power? And so we were always like maxing out on power. Okay, so opening night, we didn't know, but one of the musicians had brought a space heater with her. And it was sitting next to her, like, because it was cold, and it was an old building, and the heat was shitty. And so, you know, the show's starting, we have a packed audience, and the actors are getting ready, and I like give the speech, the welcoming speech, and then I go up to the back. There's like no path logically to like get behind the scenes to like, you have to like, everyone could see anyone that was going anywhere. 2 notes into the opening of the show is like, dun, 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 and all the power blew, of the power. And we're like, what's going on? Why can't you hear anything? And you could sort of hear them playing acoustically in the back room. And then we realized that we had blown this power. So, you know, in the theater, you're always trying to create this illusion, whereas everything goes smoothly and it goes exactly as you've rehearsed. And you never want to try to break that sort of fourth wall where like you're then talking or stopping the show. It's like, I could list on like my hand the number of times I've actually had to stop a show. Less than 5, I think. Thank God. And so we had to stop. I had to like get up and say, thank you, everyone, and give some like awkward speech to explain like, hi, I know like you think we'd have our power under control. And we had to stop everything. And we had to then move all of the pieces of the orchestra into the room because we had blown all this power and we didn't know what was going on. We moved them into the rooms. They're sitting next to the audience. And then they played acoustically because we couldn't mic them or we couldn't like amp them. And you know what though? Like, so like all kind of wonderfully disastrous experiences, it like proved it had that show had like this electricity about it because the audience was like, this is live theater. Like no other audience is going to have experienced this crazy situation that happened. So that was a perfect example of like how when something like went wrong and we just had to like, okay, here's what we're doing. We're just like moving you all into the room. And what do you mean? So, and it went great. I mean, the show was great. I love that show. So.
Oh, it's a fantastic show. And we'll get the movie sometime next year, is my understanding.
Yes,
too.
Thank goodness. I can't wait.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, in the spirit of improvisation and things that are surprising, I have been asked to surprise you with the James Lipton questions that he traditionally does at the end of every interview. So normally the actors who get to do these see them ahead of time and they can think about their answers. So this is going to be a little off the cuff for you, but
okay, I'm ready.
What's your favorite word?
Is this like a timer where I have to like
No,
be answering
it's
really
not.
fast?
No.
Okay. I would say chai. If you say
Okay.
chai to me, I'm on board.
What's your
chai
least favorite
connoisseur.
word?
Phlegm.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Cosine.
yeah.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I'm a sucker for spectacle. So like, if even in ancient theater Greek times, if like spectacle was one of the things that you needed for like a good theater experience, I'm a sucker for spectacle. And though we are a small like theater company when it comes to like what we can actually produce and what we have the budget to produce, man, the shows that really stick out to me are the ones that like they were just like going all out on spectacle. So like the end of Act 1 for Wicked, when she flies the first time, we went to like Iceland and saw this production at the National Theatre of Iceland that we couldn't understand anything that they were saying, but we still went, and like the curtains opened and it was the set was so enormous and it was already rotating, and I was like, it wasn't like 3 seconds in and I was like, this is the most amazing show I've ever seen. What is happening? So like, I'm a sucker for spectacle, and that tends to be what lights like a fire under me in regards to just like thinking about what is feasible and realistic and what is feasible and possible on stage. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
I like that. What turns you off?
Lately I've been really, I don't know if turns me off is the right way to phrase it, but I've really been, my heart has very much been in how can we do, I think this is true of theater across the country, but I'll make it personal as far as Peppermint Creek. How can we be more diverse, and how can we show more voices and better diversity and inclusion on our stages, and give voice to people that aren't typically heard. I don't know if that necessarily, it doesn't turn me off, but it's where I see a lot of work for us to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's your favorite curse word?
I don't even, right now it's just shit, because I was raised in a very, like, we did not swear in our family. My husband often calls me Pollyanna. Why do you got to be such a Pollyanna? Like, but right now, because of our son is 16 months old and he picks up on everything, he's like a little sponge. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you the number of times when, like, I've never thought about saying shit because I'm like, that's like not even a bad thing. But the number of times when he's like, Chad, watch your language. And I just totally dismiss it because I was like, he's only 16. But so right now I feel like that is the word that must be coming out of my mouth a lot, because I keep getting like hand slapped. It's just not a big deal, but I'm just like, I probably am like 85% Pollyanna. So that's as bad as it gets for me.
So it's an all-purpose word. It works well.
Yeah. What would you say?
Shit is a really great go-to, but honestly, motherfucker is just a really great word.
Right. And it's got a punch to it.
It does. It absolutely does. What sound or noise do you love?
Well, lately it's been my son's laughing. So like he's like, we've been discovering his sort of tickle spots, and he cries. He cries, and like I'm always like, why are you crying all the time? But so maybe that's what heightens the fact that like his laughter and it's so like gut level laughter is like really lovely and so wonderful. It's so wonderful to think that like, well, whatever else I'm doing wrong as a parent, like he's laughing. So
That's great. What sound or noise do you hate?
I hate. Gosh. Oh, okay. So, no, I don't. What sound do I hate? I am such a like this. You're finding out, Robin. I don't really traffic in hate very often.
I know you don't.
I'm so terrible. What do I hate? What sound do I hate? Sorry, I'm gonna pass because like I know we're gonna talk.
That's
forever.
Cool. That's cool. So, what profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I have thought about being in some sort of political office because I feel a real desire to like make the world a better place. And I even more lately hyper aware of how like it's only by getting involved, like stop bitching and just like do the work. But I think that that might kill my sense of humanity if I had to get involved in politics. So I don't think that actually, I got as far as being an election official, and then I was as far as I could go. I've often thought about when I retire, I would like to run a bakery bookshop, bakery coffee bookshop. We'll see. I mean, that's just like a random down the road. I mean, like I said, I love my job right now, like advocating for the arts and working at the state. But those are like, oh, I also would, if I had the tools, I would absolutely be a woodworker. I am really intrigued and like passionate about like home, like working with your hands with wood and like creating things from wood. I wish I had more of the right tools, because I would absolutely be there with woodworking.
What profession would you absolutely not want to attempt?
Well, like I said, I would never want to be a politician. Even though I said that, I kind of want to be in it. I would never want to do it. I think that like, I feel like we have to compromise so much of ourselves to like, try to like make the broadest number of people happy. And, and ironically, to say never want to do, I just wouldn't, I've been out of the classroom. It's so bizarre because I advocate for teachers and artists, but I think that teachers are the least appreciated and funded, the least funded, and in our society. And I think they're doing the most important work in our world, creating, like educating our next generations. And now having been out of it as long as I have, and still having so many people that I love in my life, my sister and so many of my close friends that are teachers themselves, and hearing what they grapple with every day, I just would not want to do it anymore. I don't think that they're appreciated. And I think that I worry about the ways that we sap our teachers like joy and passion for what they actually are teaching by the ways that we mistreat and mishandle teachers.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. Well, the last one is, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I hope that he says that I did the best I could. I think with the theater, and certainly with the work that I do during the day, and then now especially as a husband and dad, like there's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of doubt that I like left the world a better place, or that I created another human that was kind and good. And I worry about that. I worry about like wanting to leave the world better. And so I certainly would like really just hope that God would know that I tried as hard as I could, and that I worked to make myself better, and I didn't just sort of stop at some point trying to be a better person. So that's what I would hope.
Bravo. Good job with those and no prep.
Thanks. God, what sound do I hate? That's what I'm taking away from today's meeting. It's like, what would I have said? I'll have to think about it.
Well, maybe that changes now in the whole work from home scenario. You're hearing different things outside your house or in your house, or who knows.
Maybe, yeah. I love right now. We love our house so much, so I love being in our house. So yeah, I haven't reached that yet, but it might be. Yeah, maybe next season you interview me. But
right. Well, Chad, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for what you do for the arts community, both locally and statewide. You definitely have been in it for the long haul, and as a fan of the arts and as somebody who loves this community, I know I'm appreciative of what you do. So thank you,
and thank you to you and the Arts Council for the ways that you support artists in our community. I mean, we only survive and thrive when we all sort of can champion. And I know what a champion you are for the arts. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much for tuning in today. This podcast has been a production of the Arts Council of Greater Lansing. To learn more about them, go to lansingarts.org.